Before we dive in, a quick note. This episode contains conversations about suicide and mental health struggles. If you or someone you know is struggling, please know support is available. You can visit findahelpline.com to connect with resources wherever you are. You're not alone.
What will the future bring? Will this entrepreneurial path ever pay off the freedom, the self-efficacy of being in charge, being able to choose what to do, where to take the business? You don't have answers for that. It's all in that fog.
You're listening to Joey's Taxi, conversations from the seat of awareness. No fixing, no forcing, just shared presence. Let's ride. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, in the passenger seat, we have Tobi. Tobi is a co-founder of metaFox, where he supports coaches, facilitators, and therapists in their role as change agents. Being an engineer by education and trainer by heart, Tobi channels his passion for learning and development in hosting the Making of a Coach podcast and building new coaching tools with the metaFox team. Their coaching tools enable easy session warm-ups and deep reflection using the language of pictures, strengths, and values. Hello, Tobi. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hey, Joey. Great to talk again in this context.
It's been about a little bit over a year now when I got connected with metaFox through one of your colleagues, and it was a community call through another community, and we met, and she introduced me to metaFox and these amazing tools. I explored them. I got some card decks, some tools in the mail, was able to use them in some workshops that I do here in Tenerife, and just loved the creativity, the photo selections. It's more in line with the type of work that I do with my actual photography. Then eventually we had a connection call, and it was wonderful. And we've been collaborating ever since with a blog post, some coaching tools, methodologies that are in your ebook. And I'm just loving this process. And now here we are collaborating on a podcast. It continues.
Awesome. brings back some very warm memories of the videos from your workshops.
I was sharing some videos from workshops, and also we had a community coaching call where it was more of like a workshop based on inner presence, coming back home to presence. I'm really excited to have you on the show here, Tobi. Before we jump into things, I would love to talk about the photo that I asked you. I asked all the passengers in Joey's Taxi to share a photo or something with artwork that just catches their eye, that they connect to. Tobi shared this amazing photo. I will put it up on the screen once this is edited. But go ahead, Tobi, if you can describe this photo to us and what it represents for you.
So when you asked me to look for a photo that I guess speaks to me in some way, I found this one, which is like, I guess, half a year old, and it shows the path that I go running here in Cologne, in the west of Germany, like just 10 minutes away. And I, especially in summertime, do small morning runs there just to get a bit of podcast listening time and connect with myself. What I see in this photo is this pathway between two trees, and there's a sunshine coming through the trees, which gives me this sense of warmth and peace. And at the same time, there's also this mist, this fog in the distance, which makes the end of the path hidden. And I also like that for its sense of uncertainty it gives. And that is a nice metaphor, I think, for life and how life flows, how my life has flown through uncertainty and the warmth throughout the last years.
I asked you for your reflection prior as well, and you mentioned about coming and going of seasons and the uncertainty of the clouds in the distance. You just mentioned how life passes and everything comes and goes, representing the passing of your life. By looking at your photo, is there anything in particular that maybe is nostalgic for you, brings up something from the past, whether it was a challenging moment that you were able to overcome, or a celebratory moment, or anything in between of what comes up for you, an image or a memory when you look at this photo?
In this mist, I also see a bit, or what I connected to is, and I guess that also came through the question that you prompted me and what you said we were going to talk to, is this becoming who I am today, and also what brought me to metaFox and into that space of mindfulness, mental health, self-reflection. I guess that is also a bit the two-sided story that I have in my education. On the one hand, being an engineer, and on the other hand, also coming in touch with mental health and personal development questions quite a few times throughout my youth and young adulthood. That's what this path and on the one hand, the sunshine, the warmth, and on the other, the fog represent for me.
I find it very interesting, the background that you come from, engineering, and then going into a space of personal development and offering tools to others. I come from an IT background. I went to school for management information systems with a minor in information security. I did that for a hot 2 years. And now here I am today doing something completely other side of the spectrum. And I see a lot of alignment or experience between the two of us when it comes to our life journeys and being of service to others. Can you share a little bit more about that? What it looked like to go from this engineering background to a place of serving others through metaFox?
Yeah, I guess one starting point to mention is maybe the time before I went to university. Back then, it was 2009. We were still supposed to do military service in Germany. And I basically refused to do military service and instead chose the path of civilian service, we call it. So basically a social service that you do instead of military. And that brought me into a mental health facility where I was basically supporting people in their work therapy, is what we called it. They were doing sort of different jobs. And most of the time I was in a pottery workshop. So I would be doing pottery with these people, at the same time supporting them with these daily tasks. And on the other hand, of course, also just being there for them, listening to them. Also picking up people from the clinic when people were basically having acute phases of depression or mania. And that shaped me. And at the same time, it also showed me, it was a 9-month job, that this is super important, but maybe I'd rather go for engineering, math, and that sort of stuff. School also came easy enough to me. I also had a passion for the whole energy and climate space. I chose to do that at university at first. Yeah, but then a few years down the line, I actually went back to that facility because my own dad was diagnosed with, sort of, let's call it manic depression. And so that brought me in touch back with that theme, with that clinic, also in a much more personal way. Because then, of course, all of a sudden I was visiting my own father there. That journey continued for 10 years, like on and off. Things improved. He went back to work. Things got worse again. Really bad depression, etc. Finally actually ended in his suicide pretty much 2 years ago. It's also that story, I guess, that made mental health and personal development a very important part of my life. That already during my master's studies then, I was still studying engineering and finished that degree. And at the same time, I was already involved in a few NGOs during studies. One of them also doing complementary education for engineers, where we would then go into seminars and talk about communication, team dynamics, how to facilitate workshops, personality types, all of these things. These different stages were sort of intertwined throughout my, let's say, professional becoming. And I guess that's what defined my mission, and also then what we pursue today together at metaFox.
I'm sorry to hear about your father. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I would imagine that there's other people out there who also have loved ones who are battling some sort of a mental or physical or both ailments. What did you do, Tobi, while he was still alive, and these 10 years of him in and out? of going to get help and going back to work. How did you handle that up until the point where he took his life?
Yeah, I didn't find a silver bullet. I also was oftentimes also far away, living in different cities throughout my studies, living 4 hours away from where I grew up today. I wasn't in touch with it on a day-to-day basis. That would be a question for my mom. And I think what she would say is probably having a stable social network, surrounding yourself with many friends, being engaged in many associations. That is, I know how my mom dealt with it. To sort of have this balance and not constantly be exposed to the troubles at home in a way, but also taking care of yourself and then having other people to connect to share this with. I guess that's also my strategy to a large extent, having a strong social network.
Mm-hmm. Community. So it sounds like the people around you leaned on for support. It wasn't something that you tried to do on your own and tried to figure out on your own, but you reached out to others. It goes to show the importance of community. We're trying to do things on our own or process things, but to reach out to even a friend, or it could be a therapist, or it could really be anybody that we confide in. Your father's taking of his life, did that take you by surprise? Or was that something that in the back of your mind, maybe it was like leading up to that, and maybe one day this could happen to him?
Yes and no. He had actually 2 attempts, one unsuccessful one and a successful one, also quite a few years apart. And I guess for sure, since that unsuccessful one, that always was a scenario that sort of was around. And at the same time, of course, it still came by surprise. It had been after a period where he had been very manic, being really obsessed with a bunch of different topics, going into certain rabbit holes, and then at some point switching again, like kind of from mania into a depressive period. And actually being in that mental health facility that I also mentioned, that's where it happened. In that sense, it was also a surprise, because being in that facility where we thought, okay, now that subchapter is done and he's again in good hands, kind of, it turned out that, yeah, the hands, I don't want to say were not good, because in the end, I was very glad that he was on this open ward and not on the closed one, because I'm not sure if you've ever been to a closed psychiatric ward. I guess depending on context and country, there's different levels of horror and craziness that you are exposed to there. Sure, I'm sure the people there are also doing their very best, and it's mostly systemic issues that we have around that.
This is a very profound story. And again, I thank you for being vulnerable to share this. Would you say that this experience, I know you were doing some work before this with others, like this pottery classes that you were mentioned. Would you say this experience with your dad in those 10 years, would that have any contribution to what you're doing now with metaFox, the work that you're doing? Did this story or this experience inspire you along your path and reinforce the idea of wanting to be there for others?
Yeah, for sure. The first time the thing with my dad came up was 2012. Then in 2014, I did my trainer's education and got involved a lot in these kind of personal development topics. And then in 2018, we started metaFox. So a lot of these things sort of happened in parallel. And when we started metaFox, I didn't consciously say, okay, I want to do that now to help my dad or anything like that. But of course, I guess what adults do is often driven by their own sort of life stories and traumas and what they carry with them. I guess that's also for sure a motivator on a more or less conscious level for me.
And now let's transition to the work that you do now and the practices that you've maybe learned along the way with your training, and the idea of coming back to presence when things get hard, when things become overwhelming or not so pleasant emotions. What is it that you do in those moments to bring you back to your center to bring you back to a state of awareness and presence?
Yeah, I tried many things throughout the last 15 years. A lot is for me about getting out of my mind, because I'm a very cognitive person, very analytical, thinking things through over and over with my mind. Oftentimes, the problem is the mind, right? The solution is to somehow ease out of it, disconnect, get connected with your body. That's also what I think picture cards that we do at metaFox can help, kind of disconnect from that cognitive conscious story that you're telling yourself, and kind of accessing that notion of what is it that speaks to me on this foggy path between the trees that we discussed earlier. I did my fair share of work with that. I have now the picture that I chose on my screen, but also behind my screen, I have a bunch of different photos and collage things that basically sit behind my desk that help me to get grounded maybe once in a while. On top of that, I think it's also a mix of sports, exhausting the body, feeling the body, and also meditation. I've done lots of different meditation practices, Vipassana, mindful meditation. Try to make that a more or less regularly part of my day.
With the meditations that you've explored, is there any one particular that felt the best or felt most comfortable compared to the other meditations?
I started with a simple mindfulness meditation back then when Headspace was still a new thing. And I guess that's still the basic, right? Connecting with your breath or connecting with your body. And that's what I then more got in touch with through Vipassana. So that's these 10-day meditation retreats where you kind of disconnect, go completely away from phone, from books, from writing, from speaking. And you're just basically 10 days sitting, 10 hours per day. And that technique is a lot about body scans. In a way, you just do body scans the whole day. That can also be really powerful. And in Vipassana, they first go through mindfulness meditation as a way to train awareness. First, you start watching your breath, and then eventually you switch to watching your body, and you do these sort of body scans, starting at the top of your head, and then kind of scanning down, and then scanning up again. You just keep doing that. I think that's also something that I do when I can't sleep. Then there's also these, I think it's called Yoga Nidra, which I think is a similar technique. A bunch of different practices that are about body scans and giving attention to the different parts of your body to ground yourself.
That sounds like quite the way to be present, is 10 hours a day for 10 days, doing body scans and tapping into your inner world, your inner dimension. It sounds like you attended a couple or a few of these retreats. Was it just one retreat?
Yeah, I just attended one retreat.
Oh, one retreat. Okay.
And then kept up a more serious practice for some time, and then eventually went back to 10, 20 minutes in the morning. That's it. I have a few friends who are much more rigorous, who have attended several retreats. But it's also, of course, a big invest, right? Spending that much time. In a way, I think the quote unquote cure is at least that's what I'm saying today, is not in doing these long extreme retreats, but in what you can sustain over a longer time, right? So it's like going to the gym. It's in the end, it's a gym for the mind, and there's no point in doing this super intense boot camp and then quitting sports for the 2 years after that, right? I think with meditation and these sort of practices, it's similar. The value is maybe to some extent going into this extreme, kind of see where you can take it. Also, maybe opening some doors that would be difficult to open with just a regular 10-minute practice. But then I think what really makes a difference is managing to sustain that rather than doing one or two extreme experiences.
Yeah, like in other words, the integration, what does that look like I've done different types of, I've never done an actual retreat before, something I'm interested in. I hear a lot about these Vipassana meditation retreats where you stay in silence and there's a lot of community work. You help out, you clean, you maybe help out in the kitchen as well. You're with yourself, tuning into everything that's going on. And I've done ceremonies with plant medicine, such as ayahuasca, San Pedro. I've even experimented with psilocybin mushrooms. But there was no integration when I did those ceremonies. There was nobody to say, okay, after these experiences that you go through, and they were really extraordinary experiences, this is what you do to integrate all of this. Now that I see people, there are people who are teaching integration practices. When you went through this 10-day retreat, was there any sort of maybe a structure or a guideline to reflect on this or to integrate it after the retreat? Or was it more up to the individual to figure out how they want to integrate it?
Yeah, I think you're addressing a good point, because during the 10 days, you basically just sit. And then there's these servers that you mentioned that basically take care of food and all your well-being, your bodily well-being. You do that for 9 days. And in the evening, you have sort of a small lesson, like a 1-hour podcast in a way, from the original teacher of this Vipassana practice. On day 10, you actually break the silence and you're allowed to talk with the other participants, which is really interesting because for 9 days, you sit next to someone you have never spoken to. You have no idea which nationality they are. On day 10, you actually walk out of that hall and for the first time talk to them and, whoa, you're French. Okay, I had no idea. For me, that was really funny. And then you have 1 day to sort of debrief that and talk about how was it for you, what did you come to realize, etc. And that integration process, I would say, is mostly self-guided, which was fine for me. I've also was there with a good friend of mine who had done this many times already. You are addressing a good niche with saying, okay, it's about the what if part, like what if we now get out and get back to reality? How can we integrate this? How can we sustain this? I think that is a undervalued and underestimated challenge.
That's exactly what I've seen, and this is why I pose this question to you. This is exactly what I see in my experience with plant medicine ceremonies. Luckily, I didn't fall into this path of when you're, okay, let's talk about what I've personally experienced, the plant medicine ceremonies, where you get these extraordinary cosmic visions. And then when you come back down to earth, so to speak, medicine wears out of your system the few days following the ceremony, then you're left with, oh, this is my reality? I want to go back to that cosmic place, those visions. Sometimes it's not so good visions. Sometimes they're beautiful, loving, pure visions. What I have seen in friends is that they want to keep going back to these ceremonies, to keep going to that place out of their mind, because they don't know how to integrate what they've seen or the visions that they saw. Instead of learning how to integrate or having a facilitator teach how to integrate, they keep going back for that. We can call it a high. I think something maybe similar may carry over into retreats where people just want to keep going. I'm generalizing now, but maybe there are people who want to keep going because they always want to be disconnected from their real world because they don't have the tools in place or no one taught them how to integrate this in everyday lives. Maybe you go once and you're like, okay, there's no need for me to go back, but I will find my own way. Like you're speaking about, I will self-initiate this and find my own way to meditate and to come back to my own presence. I think it's something that would be beneficial across the board, whether it's retreats, ceremonies, you name it. Integration is very, very key to understand what we saw, what we experienced, what we felt, and how do we bring this into our everyday lives and not get lost in the stories and going back to those stories and attaching to those stories. I would like to revisit your photo. There's something that came to my mind when thinking back to your photo. The fog that's in the distance. What could be in that fog? Is there something that maybe there is a fear to tap into or to connect with that's in that fog? Or is there something that is maybe a procrastination about doing a certain something in life that's in that fog, that's in the distance? And maybe you walk that path and maybe don't quite get to that foggy area because it might be causing some unpleasant sensations. Just a off-the-cuff question for you. Does that resonate with you at all?
I could walk this path towards the fog, or away from the fog, and both make sense sort of in my metaphor. Because if I would be walking away, then the fog would be also these less pleasant experiences in my past. And if I would be walking towards it, then it is the uncertainty in my future. And especially having chosen this sort of unconventional path, not pursuing my energy industry career that I initially studied for and then also started building a career. That's a theme that came up actually also in the last few weeks when entrepreneurially we are also going through a rough patch. We talked about this outside this podcast, having to let some people go from metaFox, decreasing rather than increasing my own salary to sustain the business. That, of course, also made me question, was this the right choice? And what will the future bring? Will this entrepreneurial path ever pay off? What does paying off even mean? Is that financially the meaning, the freedom, the self-efficacy of being in charge, being able to choose what to do, where to take the business? You don't have answers for that. It's all in that fog. And I think that's the continuous challenge that all entrepreneurs, but I think in the end, everybody who doesn't know what life brings in the future can relate to maybe and has to live with that fog, you know, and you see, okay, there's the sunshine over there, but there's also the fog and I don't like it, but it's still there. And I can't do anything but kind of walking into it. And I think that's what I like about this metaphor. That's what life is in the end, a walk through the fog.
That's powerful. A walk through the fog. Just take a moment to let that settle in there. A walk into the unknown, into uncertainty. Living life at the end of our comfort zone. Thank you for that, Tobi. I appreciate you. We're coming to a close on our episode of Heartfelt Sharing. I think we can go on longer and longer, but we'll conclude it here. I would love to ask you, if people are interested, if our listeners are interested in discovering more about you and your podcast as well. I've listened to episodes and you have wonderful coaches on there talking about their origin stories and how they got to become a coach. The demos that you offer there as well are very helpful. How can people find you, Tobi?
There's metaFox.eu. That's our website of the things we do. Especially if you are a human working with other humans in maybe social work, therapy, coaching, leadership training, then that's a good place to find some tools. There's that podcast. Maybe, Joey, you can include the link in the show notes that you mentioned where I talk about themes like that and also more practical. How do I run my team development journey? How do I do coaching? These sort of questions. I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't know, how is it? /in/Tobi Weghorn. So just my name.
I'll put that in the show notes as well, all the links there so people can reach out to you. And take a look at metaFox's website. They have some amazing tools on there. As I mentioned, I own several of them and I use them all the time in my workshops here. And I've also used the online tool with metaFox with online community workshops. Some of these tools have questions in the back of them as well for reflection. I find those to be even more powerful, to have the participants flip over their cards and just dwell on that question on the back there and share that with their partner when I do group breakouts. You and metaFox and the team have certainly enhanced my workshop game, for sure. I feel more connected to the participants and I can see how they connect more deeply with each other as well through metaFox's tools. So thank you very much, Tobi, for coming on the show. I really appreciate you and your shares. Thank you for the listeners for tuning in and checking out our episode. I'm looking forward to sharing my reflection based on this episode next. All right, take care. Bye, Tobi.
Thanks for the space. Thank you, Joey.
You're welcome. Thanks for riding along. If you'd like to stay connected, follow the podcast and leave a mindful review. Until next time, stay in the seat.